Hello everyone. Today my group is going to present the case of bias algorithm against women and race in the admission of St. George Medical School back in the 1980s. The issue first started when there was a rising issue concerning the equality of opportunity and access to higher education. However, the attention was drawn specifically to medical schools by publications in 1985 and 1986 that showed that by evaluating 11 London medical schools, it was reported that the proportion of non-European varied from 5 to 12%, from which it was usually correlated with the proportion of women students in the medical schools being the minority. Two of the four main researchers were senior lecturers in the St. George Medical School. Both doctors in the 3rd December of 1986 confirmed that the school had discriminated on grounds of both race and gender for the admissions. It was largely due to the discovery of a computer program that was built to perform the initial selection process for the student admissions. Two questions specifically intrigued them. The first question that raised question was asking whether the prospective student was a Caucasian or not, yes or no, and the second one asking whether the prospective student is a male or not. It turned out that the person who answered yes and yes for both questions ranked 19 in the system ranking, while the same person with the same academic background that answered no and no for both questions ranked 37th. This hence confirmed the discrimination performed in the admission process due to the numerized result. This led to further formal investigations by the commissions back in the 1987. Thanks to the formal investigation, a lot of findings were made regarding the case. The computer program idea started in 1973, where there were a huge increase of applications for the St. George Medical School. Dr. Franklin, who was actively engaged in the selection process, had an initiative to build a computer program with the aim to remove any inconsistencies in the selection process. As he said, he built the program based having observed the decisions of the selectors over the previous years, and he adjusted the program accordingly to specifically mimic the judgment of the selectors. By 1979, the program had achieved 90 to 95% accuracies and was then introduced to the selection process. It was reported that the program was so closely correlated with the actual decisions made by the selectors, such that the factors considered were an accurate replications of the ones considered by the selectors themselves. By 1982, due to the reliability reported, the program started to operate solely by itself. However, the statement that said that it was an actual replication of the behavior of and factors considered by the selectors raised a question for our group of whether that it was the computer program fault or the admission teams. Hence, we shall dig deeper into the computer programs.
So what factors do the program take into account? It takes into account mostly academic factors, namely the O-levels and the A-levels, which together account for 75% of the weighting. However, the remaining 25% includes other personal details such as the student's age, the head teacher's report, whether they did any sports or hobbies or social and community work. Also takes into account their handwriting and whether they have any connections with St. George and so on. However, also on the list are their ethnicity and gender. Now, what's interesting is that their ethnicity is determined from their last names by the admissions team. So they're never asked in any way what their ethnicity is. Now on this next slide, you'll see the sample output of the program. On the left, you'll find the personal score assigned to each student with some example values. So the lower your personal score is, the better. In this case, we display the personal score before we factor in race and gender. to make it a fair comparison. Now, as an example, say you have 0.80 as your personal score, then if you were male and Caucasian, this would put you in the first percentile. But if you were male and non-Caucasian, you would be in the 8th percentile, which is considerably worse for admissions. If you were female and you were Caucasian, you'd still be in the first percentile. But again, if you were non-Caucasian, you'd be only in the 10th percentile. You'll see that this pattern persists across like the different personal scores and rankings. In all of these values given, being non-Caucasian makes you very worse off. You'll see that in the report, it says that non-Caucasians have it 33% worse than Caucasians, and being female actually lowers your score by 5% compared to being male. So this program by 1979 was 90 to 95% accurate as to what the admissions team's decisions were, which suggests that the mistake might not have been just with the system. So what do we know about the algorithm itself? Unfortunately, not much. It could have been some form of manually designed rules-based system, or it could also have been a machine learning system, maybe some form of neural network. We cannot ascertain its exact nature, but based on a quote in the report, we believe that it is a rules-based system. This quote, which says that Dr. Franklin, the designer of the system, he designed it by observing the decisions of the selectors over a number of years and adjusting the program accordingly. Now, the wording of this quote suggests that he was personally responsible for designing all the rules in the system. And on this, he was found guilty for discrimination by race and gender.
So Dr. Franklin says that he created the program to make the admissions process fairer. He wanted to remove the inconsistencies so that every student applicant would be subject to the same evaluation. He says that his algorithm mimicked the behavior of the human assessors. So a question comes to mind: was the bias really introduced with the program, or was it already there? As we know, the program was shown to be 90 to 95% compatible with the selection panel decisions before it was used. So we can easily come to the conclusion that the bias that was present in the algorithm was also present in the decisions of the admissions team before 1982. Another problem that we found was that, to our best knowledge, Dr. Franklin was the only creator of the program. And how can something be unbiased if only one man creates it? Then surely his ideas and opinions are going to be reflected in the program. And another problem that we found is a cultural one. So after a few years, many members of staff started noticing a lack of diversity in the students. And when they were raising the issue, they were simply told that the program was running correctly and that they didn't have to worry. We actually know that in 1982 and in 1985, a working party was set up to review the admissions procedures. And Dr. Franklin claims that he gave a full description of the algorithm. However, the working party says that he didn't mention the racial factor. We also know that in 1986, Dr. Gareth Johns found that the computer was storing data about students' racial origins. And he informed the school's secretary, but he was told that that was simply because of information and statistics reasons. So we can see that even though many members of staff have noticed that there was something wrong with the program, they viewed the admissions machine as unquestionable, and so did nothing.
So what could we do better to prevent incidents like this from happening in the future? The Commission's recommended course of action to St George's after the discovery of the incident is spoken about in the paper. They tried to take into account that the programme in itself wasn't sexist or racist, but the result of already existing discrimination across the admissions team, so introduced measures against this. The most significant of the changes that were put in place was monitoring. The process of application was split into 3 stages the original application forms, the interviews, and the late selection or clearing system the college had in place already. The Commission suggested making a note of the gender and race of each applicant or the staff's best guess, based on their name, at each stage. From there, the Commission would be able to consistently check the proportion of groups passing each stage and compare them to the ratio of original applicants. They also recommended that admissions forms, such as the UCCA and now UCAS form, add a gender and ethnicity field to their application so that monitoring may be more accurate in the future. St George's was monitored in this way for 3 years after the discovery of the event, and other British medical schools were also informed of the incident. The Commission also noted that using unrelated data such as hobbies in the programme might also lead to indirect discrimination, so discouraged the use of factors such as this unless they related to academics. They also state that any new programme, if one were made, should be open and controlled by a senior member of staff, and that each application form should be viewed by multiple members of staff, not just one. The use of a programme to prevent bias amongst the admissions team wasn't a bad idea. With more recent technology such as advances in machine learning, this system could be an asset to decision-making in this way. However, leaving this process to a programme alone would be unethical, especially if students are unaware that this is occurring. In this case, the best way to reduce chances of discriminatory bias, whether related to a programme or not, would be monitoring the situation as the Commission did. And now I'll hand over to Nicole, who's going to talk about some more recent incidents of discriminatory bias in programmes.
I will now go over 2 similar cases dealing with machine bias. The first one concerns a risk assessment algorithm called Compass by Northpoint. Northpoint's core product is a set of scores derived from 137 questions, either answered by the defendant or pulled from their criminal record, with race not being one of the questions. The algorithms it uses, however, are marked as trade secrets and are not available to the public. In an investigation made by ProPublica, it has been found that the predictions failed differently for white defendants and African American, with the first group mislabeled as lower risk way more often than the second. According to the analysis of data, the latter are wrongly labeled as future criminals twice more often. It has to be noted that a second investigation by CRG disputes the conclusions made by ProPublica. The second case deals with the error rates of 3 facial analysis programs. In the researchers' experiment, error rates in determining the gender of light-skinned men were never worse than 0.8%. However, for darker-skinned women, they were much more than 20% in one case and more than 34% in the other 2. Ultimately, it was discovered that the datasets used to assess the program's performance were more than 77% male and more than 80% white, thus leading to a false sense of success. And now I'll hand over back to Una for the conclusion of our presentation.
The algorithm was created due to an increasing number of applicants, with the intention of removing any inconsistencies that might arise from applicants being judged by different members of the committee. The algorithm was solely used for almost 4 years, with Dr. Franklin updating it during this time. The algorithm's bias was a result of human bias. Dr. Franklin wrote the program while knowingly creating this bias. He was the only person to produce the program, and almost no one other than him completely knew about the content of the program. Many people were discriminated against in this event, but it did bring to light the already existing bias in the admissions team due to the 90 to 95% correlation rate with the program. Measures such as the monitoring of the school application system were put in place to prevent a case like this from happening again. More recent examples show that the bias in algorithms is still a problem. However, in the 2 examples shown, they seem to be a result of indirect discrimination or a biased pool of information provided by people. The time it took to respond to these incidents was vastly shorter than the 7-year time period in which St. George's algorithm was used, showing that the users of these programs are now more aware of the potential for biased situations. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the presentation.